Welcome back to episode 2. I'm Colonial Man. Now, I realized that in my first episode, the last one, the previous one, I misnamed my book. I misannounced my book. It is United States history, all right, but I forgot that it also says Roots Through Constitution, then Our Disappearing Legacy. You see, I was so nervous, and now you're probably doubting whether, in fact, I really did write it. I did. I swear I did. Now, here's a close-up of it. Isn't that a beauty? There it is. Oh, look at it. It's just chock-a-block full of information that you're just dying to know about as far as the roots of our country. Anyway, enough of the advertisement. Now, I told you I was going to be breaking down that segment of the Declaration of Independence, which I recited in the first episode, line by line. Now, in a sense, I'm going to focus in on just a part of the first line of the first paragraph, where it says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." That would mean obvious. These are truths that we believe in. They're obvious truths. That all men are created equal. Well, in colonial times, you would be arguably justified in saying, how did you have slaves? Well, that becomes a huge debate. And is it all men and all women, or is it just men? And indeed, this has changed over time, as you can now witness in 21st century America. But we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, the part I want to focus in on is this: endowed by their Creator. Endowed is a fancy word meaning given. Didn't deserve it. It was given to us. We were given these rights by God. They are God-given rights. Now, why is that important? Well, if they're not God-given rights, then I would ask you, from where do the rights come? Think about it for a minute. Rights are things that we just take for granted. Where did they come from? We don't afford these same things to the lesser animals, now do we? Perhaps some of you do if you belong to PETA, but I don't. Now, the point is this: these rights were given to us by God. Now, let's say you're an atheist and you don't believe in God. Now what? You're going to have to answer that for yourself. I can't dictate your religious beliefs. We even talked back then, at least James Madison certainly talked about separation of church and state, and John Adams certainly did, and Thomas Jefferson certainly did. They didn't foresee it becoming what you've interpreted it to be, because when we talked about a separation of church and state, we didn't want what England had, which was the government dictating what church we would go to. The point of a separation was so the government would not control our religious beliefs. It was not that we could not express our religious beliefs openly. Far from it. It was not that we could not expect government to uphold our religious beliefs. Far from it. This was not the government being protected from religion. It was the other way around. It was the religion, it was the people's beliefs in God being protected from the government dictating, as they did with the Anglican Church in England. And I won't go into the Catholic Church, but many would point to the Pope and say, well, the Pope was too influential in the 1500s, 1600s, and 1700s of what people were allowed to believe. Now, but let's get back to the point at hand. If these rights did not come from God, from where do they come? Nature? Well, You've watched enough nature shows on telly to know that given a colony of baboons, for instance, that they'll rip one of the weaker members apart limb from limb, torturing him. That if, say you have a pet hamster, and the hamster delivers a baby hamster which is not perfectly formed, what does she do? She eats her young. Well, if these are the rights of nature, certainly those animals which kill their own kind, and I realize that humans are notorious for murder at times, but the Bible speaks directly against murder. It's called sinning. The animals think not about sinning. They just work off of instinct. So, if these rights do not come from God, if they do not come from nature, then what's left? Does your government give you these rights? Dear people, that is a most dangerous supposition. For what the government gives, the government can surely take away. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's a famous quote by Lord Acton of England. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. You give any person enough power, and eventually they will abuse it. The power must be checked. So if you want to give the government the right to your life, your liberty, your right to pursue happiness, you just go ahead. But I will have you know this. George Washington and the Continental Army, the people who suffered and died for this country and were willing to stand up against the mightiest power at the time on the face of the earth, would be ashamed. That concludes this episode. Next, I will be talking about to secure these rights. So look forward to Colonial Man telling you about the next part of the Declaration of Independence in episode 3. Thank you.